Guys, today I'm going to rank Genshin characters based on how good they are in the patch 4.6. By this I mean that I'm going to consider the current base and basically tell you how good each character is for that right now. I used to make this type of videos by looking at usage rates before, and while I'm not going to completely disregard those in today's video, I'm going to give you more context and explanations because I think usage rates by themselves can easily be fallible. So first of all, current base lineups are a bit messy. The reason is that this time around, on both sides they mixed boss rooms with rooms featuring waves of opponents. This means that characters that are either single target oriented or AoE oriented are struggling here because you need a bit of both. And that's why I believe that the MVP of this patch is Kazuha. I'm saying this because Kazuha is a character that can hide the weaknesses of a single target oriented character in AoE scenarios. Specifically, through his grouping and the AoE reaction damage, Kazuha can take you a long way against groups of opponents even if your main DPS can't. And of course, he offers hell of a lot damage amplification as well. Also, he offers great utility in the first boss rooms against the 3 Kankis. That's because the first Kanki on the right can do 2 types of attacks to start the fight. The first is a dash all throughout the room, and the second is a combo of sword slashes. Typically, you really want him to do the sword slashes because that way he'll remain grouped with the other Kankis and you can deal damage to all of them through AoE attacks. And in this regard, what probably many people don't know here is that you can control the RNG of his patterns through positioning. There are several good ways to act here, and one of them is using Kazuha's elemental skill to start the fight. Basically, if you go a few steps forward and go up in the air, the Kanki will almost never use the dash. Of course, it's not only Kazuha that can do this here, but it really just adds to his dominance even more. On the flip side, I'm putting Sucrose in decent here, because I think compared to Kazuha, her utility is just not that great, both in terms of swirling in AoE and grouping, and in general, I believe she's only really good in single target situations, which is not really the specific focus of this abyss. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. Moving on, abyss blessings are also kind of impacting this list, but they're a bit tricky to consider because each of them only lasts for 2 weeks. So it's a bit hard to rank all the units in a single list based on all of them. For example, current one is benefiting Pyro characters because it reduces all the resistance of the opponents when they get hit by Pyro reactions, and for this reason characters like Xianyun, Bennett are god tier right now. Like, I would put them in the highest tier even without the blessing because they're so good, but the blessing makes them even better right now. I'm talking about them specifically because they're amazing supports that can fit on a lot of teams, and note that the blessing doesn't only benefit Pyro characters but any team that can trigger Pyro reactions. So for example, if you play something like Navia double Pyro and trigger up Pyro crystallites, you will get the full benefits of the blessing. Also, the continuous Pyro application from a character like Xianyun really helps against the Electrolectors in the second side of their base when they put the Electro shields on. Really, it's a situation where everybody eats, because obviously there are a lot of characters that can use at least one between Xianyun and Bennett. For example, Nuvilette with his vape teams. Of course, Nuvilette is a fantastic character in general, but since he can take advantage of the current blessing, he is shining even more. Child of course is very good in this abyss, not only thanks to the blessing, but also thanks to the fact that a lot of the rooms in the current abyss are AoE based. Then other carries that can integrate Pyro supports well, like for example Brisley in his melt vape teams, they function quite well. They don't use Kazuha, so you can't abuse the trick against the Kankis by using his skill, but in general, it's a very good composition that feels good on both sides of their base, really. And even with the future blessings, it will age well, because they're about HP loss, healing, so they fit his kit very well. Then I would put Wanderer here, because his double Pyro teams feel pretty good. And the current blessing feels especially needed for him against Coppelius, who has very high Ganimo resistance. And in general, I think he feels pretty good in this abyss, especially in rooms that feature multiple opponents in multiple waves, since Wanderer is a ranged character that can hit all opponents on the room by standing in the same spot, so even if the second wave gets spawned in a different place from the first one, it will have no issues hitting the new opponents. Furina of course goes to perfect. She's an amazing character and she fits all the 3 blessings that will be in the current abyss. Then I would put Arlecchino, Line and Gaming in the highest tier. Like I think they're the best Pyro DPS for this patch because they have very good single target ceiling damage, but their AoE potential is also pretty great. They're very flexible carries. Line with his front rod like the burst, Arlecchino with his combos, Gaming with the plunges. So they feel pretty nice to use in all the rooms. I think Arlecchino is the best out of the three because she just feels smoother, easier to play, while Line can feel a bit clunky with the charge attacks. Gaming can feel very clunky if you don't have his Constellation 6, and with the Constellation 6, it's not as smooth as Arlecchino really, but all three of them, when fully optimized, they will smash this abyss, like they will destroy it. Then I would put Hu Tao in great, because I feel like she's more single target oriented compared to these three characters, and that kind of limits her in AoE rooms. You could argue that Line is also single target oriented because of his charge attacks, but the thing is with Line, he has a massive elemental burst that deals a lot of AoE front-loaded damage that can even end rooms completely in some situations, like against the Genki, while Hu Tao really doesn't have something like that.
Hu Tao technically has the plunge teams with Xianyun that give her more AoE, but compared to Gaming, a smaller portion of her damage is coming from the plunges themselves. Each of Gaming's plunges will feel like an AoE nuke, while for Hu Tao it's noticeably worse. Also, Gaming's Constellation 6 gives him increased range compared to Hu Tao on his plunges, which helps here.
Then I would put a lot of the characters that go Dendro teams in great, like Quicken teams, Quick Bloom teams. I like how they feel in this abyss, because they have nice single target damage. They fit very well multi-wave scenarios with many opponents since they have long rotations where they can quick swap, Al-Haytham can, Keqing can, Yae can, so it feels very nice. But I'm not putting them higher just because most of the Dendro teams won't benefit from the blessings of the current abyss for the most part, excluding things like Al-Haytham, Furina, Quick Bloom, some Baiju Quick Bloom teams with Furina still, they won't really benefit that much. And also, I just feel like this time around, characters like Line, Gaming, when fully optimized, feel better than Al-Haytham, for example, in this abyss. Same for Arlecchino and Neuvillette, obviously. But still, yeah, I consider them on the cusp of perfect for this abyss, just lacking the blessing, really. Meanwhile, Cyno goes to decent. Could also go lower to me, because we have 3 rooms that feature multi-wave scenarios, so situations where Cyno doesn't fit very well because of his long rotations and the fact he can't quick swap, so it feels worse than somebody like Keqing or Al-Haytham here, definitely. Still putting him in decent though, because if you have the Furina, Baiju, Nahida Quick Bloom team with Cyno, then the Dendro application becomes more flexible and it can adapt to multi-wave scenarios better, but if you don't, it will feel pretty bad, yeah. I would put Raiden in great as well. Raiden is the kind of character that has a team for every scenario, so it's pretty rare for her to have bad matchups, but still I'm putting her in great because on Constellation 0, I don't think she's really that comparable to Arlecchino or Neuvillette in terms of damage. If you have Constellations, sure, but Constellation 0, no. I would put her in great at most. Then I would put Chevreuse in perfect for this abyss, Constellation 6 specifically. If Constellation 0, I would put her in here in great. She fits the current abyss very well because in single target situations against bosses, she's better than Kazuha in the same teams mostly in terms of damage amplification, and in AoE situations for this abyss specifically, she fits well because it's rooms with multiple waves of opponents that you will kill very easily, very quickly. So if you play Kazuha there with a character that can swap out, like Raiden for example, you won't be able to swap in with Kazuha for the second wave to reapply the buffs, but Chevreuse doesn't have this issue because her buffs keep applying from off-field. Shame she's not on banner, I guess. Isho, goes to great. She mostly fits on Dendro teams. I haven't seen her in any of the top meta teams with these characters. Maybe Line overload with Chevreuse, but I don't really like that team, honestly. So yeah, I would put her in great because she's mostly tied to Dendro teams this patch, I feel like. Nilum, I would put her on decent overall. She feels perfect when a single side of the abyss only has rooms with many opponents and no bosses, but it's not the case in this abyss. In the AoE scenarios, she still feels amazing, but the issue is that you have rooms like Coppelius, the Baptist, where she just feels kinda bad compared to the top meta DPS and even characters in great, and bad enough that I'm only putting her in decent here. Itto and these Mono Geo teams, I'm putting them in decent. Look, the thing is, unless they have a very good matchup matchup, they're just not going to feel like they're as good as the characters placed above or the teams placed above. That's just how it is for Geo. They just have flaws that other characters here don't have. They are not good enough in terms of damage, in terms of utility. They're durable teams, they have that, but overall, they're just not that great unless they have a great matchup. So Albedo goes to Ningyuang goes to like Albedo is better than Ningyuang, but yeah, lowest tier. Noelle goes to decent, but Navia is good. The good Geo character. Pretty great main DPS. She has very good teams here in the double Pyro teams I mentioned before. She fits well with Furina, so she will fit well in with the future blessings. Then I'm going to surprise somebody here maybe, but I'm putting Dehya in a great. She has nice defensive uses, especially with the current blessing where her being a Pyro support for a team is actually useful offensively, and her main carry teams, the mono Pyro teams, Furina Babe teams, feel good in this abyss where she gets buffs or free, and also they feel pretty durable. I think her mono Pyro teams feel better to use than the Ito mono Geo teams in this abyss, honestly. In the same way, Yanfei, who can play in pretty much the same teams as Dehya, and also becomes a defensive option with the Constellation 4 that makes her a shielder, so pretty equal value here. Yoimiya goes to decent, I guess. She fits on Pyro teams, so that's a plus. Like, she's a Pyro character, so of course she does. But she's single target oriented, and since the current abyss has many AoE rooms, really not the best fit. Ayaka and their cryo friends, Shenhe, Ganyu. Honestly, kind of the same deal as Nilu, in that they can feel good in AoE rooms, but in boss rooms it's a struggle unless they have massive investment. And even then, Coppelius has a lot of cryo resistance, and while currently they can cope with the blessing, like the Pyro blessing, if they bring melt teams, for example, with future blessings they won't really be able to cope much. I just think Brisley is the superior, more flexible cryo option now. Xiao, great. Not higher because Coppelius kinda slows him down compared to these other units because of the Anemo resistance, but for the rest, it feels pretty great to use in about every room. Xianyun, perfect for this abyss, even though she doesn't have many top tier uses, like excluding Gaming, not really. But it's mostly because the current lineups, how they're disposed in the abyss, it fits her, because you don't really need grouping. It helps if you have Kazuha, but you don't need it because opponents, when they spawn, they're pretty near to each other, even the groups of opponents. So even without a grouper, you can do fine, and that favors Xianyun because she doesn't have grouping, and her plunge teams will feel at least great. Like Diluc to me goes to great. Yanan, Xinqiao, perfect for this abyss, not really because they have specifically great matchups, but really just because they are amazing supports that still fit on many teams. They now fit on our Kino teams as well, and she's a top meta DPS, so yeah. Zhongli, I don't really feel like you need defense a lot in this abyss. It's nice to have, but the damage the opponents will deal is certainly lower compared to past abysses, mostly because Coppelius and the Genki are in room 1 and 2, so their level is not 100, so that means that their damage is also lower and more manageable. Cookie also goes to great for the Dendro teams. Candace goes to decent because of the newfound use with our Kino teams, where she can be a Hydro support for her, and it feels pretty great. Tignari, decent. Unlike the other Quicken carries here, his damage is mostly single target oriented, so it won't feel as good in cases where you're facing many opponents. Kokomi, great for her mono Hydro teams with Furina and Yelan and Kazuha. It's just a team that feels pretty solid to use in about every scenario, and this abyss really makes no exception, even though it doesn't take advantage of the blessing. It's just a really easy team to use that also deals nice damage, so great. Kirara, Dendro teams, great. Klee, mono Pyro teams, great. I guess the physical ones will go to because it's physical still. Parozan, great, because of Xiao and Wanderer teams, so yeah, pretty obvious, great. I'm not going to rank every unit because it gets a bit vague at a certain point, like most of them are just niche, it depends, I don't know. But I just wanted to highlight which units have a good matchups in this abyss or are great in general, and which units are just kinda meh this time around. Now I'll compare the usage rates with the list a bit, because I want to point out some flaws. Obviously there, Furina, Neuvillette, Arlecchino, Kazuha have very high usage rates, predictably, but others I've ranked rather highly in my list, like Line, Gaming, Xianyun, Xiao, Wanderer, Breezely, Navia. They're all pretty low on the usage rates chart. But that doesn't mean they're bad. Players are either using Arlecchino or Neuvillette, or maybe Dendro teams, like one of those three, and of course the other main DPS get hurt from that. You can use just 2 teams, so somebody is going to be left out. But I assure you the difference between Line and Arlecchino is not of 60% usage rate. They're much closer than that, in the same tier to me kinda for the current base. I think Arlecchino is a bit better, but overall in the same tier. And that's why instead of just analyzing usage rates, I did my own thing this time around. I think that's closer to the truth. And I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and also go check the Arlecchino post-release video where I compared her to Neuvillette and Hu Tao. Bye bye.